Hello and welcome to Massive Open Online course on effective decision making. Today our topic is understanding conflict, types and strategies. The main objectives of our today's topic are to know what conflict is, to know about major definitions of conflict, to understand types of conflict, to know about the characteristics of conflict, to understand sources of conflict, to understand conflict escalation and management. First of all, we will like to discuss about the concept of conflict. As it has been said by Mahatma Gandhi, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Conflicts are the part of nature and certainly part of human relations. People experience conflict with other persons, in teams or in groups, as well as between larger entities, departments, organizations, communities and countries. Conflicts appear at home, at work and in our spare time activities with friends, with people we love and with people we hate, as well as with our superiors and subordinates and co-workers. Parties need to accept conflicts as a part of life dynamics and learn to deal with them effectively and efficiently. There are different ways to come with a definition of conflict. It can be described as a disagreement among groups or individuals characterized by antagonism and hostility. This is usually fueled by the opposition of one party to another in an attempt to reach an objective different from that of other party. The elements involved in conflict have varied set of principles and values, thus allowing such a conflict to arise. According to Michael Nicholson, it's an activity which takes place when conscious beings wish to carry out mutually inconsistent acts concerning their wants, needs or obligations. Conflict is an escalation of disagreements which is its common prerequisite and is characterized by the existence of conflict behavior in which beings are actively trying to damage one another. Parker Follett defined conflict as the appearance of differences, difference of opinions or differences of interests. Now let's understand the classification of conflict from a broader perspective. Conflict is classified into the following types. Interpersonal conflict. It refers to a conflict between two individuals. This occurs typically due to how people are different from one another. We have varied personalities which usually results to incompatible choices and opinions. Apparently, it is a natural occurrence which can eventually help in personal growth or developing your relationships with others. In addition, coming up with adjustments is necessary for managing this type of conflict. However, when interpersonal conflict gets too destructive, calling in a mediator would help so as to have it resolved. Number 2, intrapersonal conflict. It occurs within an individual. The experience takes place in the person's mind, hence it is a type of conflict that is psychologically involving the individual's thoughts, values, principles and emotions. Furthermore, this type of conflict can be quite difficult to handle if you find it harder to decipher your inner struggles. It leads to restlessness and uneasiness or can even cause depression. In such occasions, it would be best to seek a way to let go the anxiety through communicating with other people. Eventually, when you find yourself out of the situation, you can become more empowered as a person. Thus, the experience evoked a positive change which will help you in your own personal growth. Next, intergroup conflict. It takes place when a misunderstanding arises among different teams within an organization. For instance, the sales department of an organization can come in conflict with the customer support department. This is due to the varied set of goals and interests of these different groups. In addition, competition also contributes for intergroup conflict to arise. There are other factors which fuel this type of conflict. Some of these factors may include a rivalry in resources or the boundaries set by a group to others, which establish their own identity as a team. Next, intra-group conflict. It's a type of conflict that happens among individuals within a team. The incompatibilities and misunderstandings among these individuals lead to an intra-group conflict. It arises from interpersonal disagreements. For example, team members have different personalities which may lead to tension or differences in views and ideas. Within a team, conflict can be helpful in coming up with decisions which will eventually allow them to reach their objectives as a team. However, if the degree of conflict disrupts harmony among the members, then some serious guidance from a different party will be needed for it to be settled. As said by L. Ron Hubbard, ideas and not battles mark the forward progress of mankind. Now let's talk about the major types of motivational conflicts. Conflict from psychological point of view is also called motivational conflict. It's one important source of frustration. It results when two or more motives drive behavior towards incompatible goals. Psychologists point towards 4 types of motivational conflicts: approach conflict, avoidance conflict, approach avoidance conflict, and double approach avoidance, or also known as multiple approach avoidance conflict. Moving towards the first one, that is approach conflict. It occurs when you must choose between 2 desirable outcomes. In this type of conflict, a person is faced with 2 attractive alternatives, only one of which can be selected. For example, there are 2 courses that you want to take, but they are scheduled for the same time. Approach conflicts are usually easy to resolve. For example, you choose one course and decide to take the another next semester. Number 2, avoidance conflict. It occurs when you must choose between 2 unattractive alternatives. The examples include a boy must do his arithmetic homework which he dislikes or get a spanking. A student must spend the next 2 days studying for an examination or face the possibility of failure. A woman must work at a job she intensely dislikes or take the chance of losing her income. Such conflicts are capsuled in saying caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. There are 2 types of behaviors that occurs in this type of conflict. First, vacillation of behavior and thought. Second, desire to leave the conflict situation altogether. Avoidance conflict generates many intense emotions. We can all think of things we do not want to do, but must do or face even less desired alternatives. Next, approach avoidance conflict. It exists when one event or goal has both attractive and unattractive features. It is often the most difficult to resolve because in this type of conflict, a person is both attracted and repelled by the same goal object. Because of the positive valence of the goal, the person approaches it, but as it is approached, the negative valence becomes stronger. Next, double approach avoidance or multiple approach avoidance conflicts. Here, you must choose between 2 or more things, each of which has both desirable and undesirable features. Many of life's major decisions involve multiple approach avoidance conflict, meaning that several goals with positive and negative valence are involved. Suppose a woman is engaged to be married. Suppose further that the goal of the marriage has a positive valence because she loves the man she will be marrying. On the other hand, the marriage is repellent to her because it will mean giving up an attractive offer of job in another city. With respect to her career, the woman is attracted to new job but also repelled by the problems it will create for her marriage. Now, let's discuss about the characteristics of conflict. Iwema and Gibbels highlighted some key elements of conflict. Conflict implies dependence and interdependence. Parties rely on some extent on other parties to realize their goals. This interdependence can be positive, negative, or mixed. Positive interdependence is strongly related to cooperative conflict behaviors, while negative interdependence triggers competitive behaviors. Conflicts are mostly mixed motive structures because parties have simultaneous motives to cooperate and motives to compete. Parties, on the one hand, depend on each other to realize their goals, and on the other hand, they are at the same time competitors. The mixed motive structure is very important to understand conflict dynamics. When conflict arises, the competitive aspects become more salient and the cooperative structure often is perceived less by parties. Interventions to solve conflict, therefore, are often related to these perceptions and the underlying structures. Conflict is a psychological experience. Conflict is by definition a personal and subjective experience, as each individual can perceive and manage the same conflict in a different manner. Conflict does not necessarily have an objective basis. It depends on the perception of specific situation, and the perception is by definition subjective and personal. Conflict concerns cognitive and affective tension. When someone perceives blocked goals and disagreements, he or she can also, although not necessarily, feel fear or anger. Many authors consider that conflict is emotionally charged, although the emotions does not need to be labeled necessarily as a negative emotion. Some people actually enjoy conflict. Emotional experiences in conflict are also scripted by cultural, historical, and personal influences. Conflict can be unidirectional. One party can feel frustrated or thwarted by the other, while the second party is hardly aware of and does not perceive the same reality of the conflict. Conflict is a process. Conflict is a dynamic process that does not appear suddenly, but takes some time to develop and pass through several stages. Conflict is the process resulting from the tension in interpersonal interactions or between team members because of real or perceived differences. Now, let's understand the source of conflict and the 5 beliefs that propel a group towards conflict. Sources of conflict. Taking a look into what causes conflict can help us understand this phenomenon even more. Hence, let us take into consideration the common sources of conflict. The 3 main sources of conflict as proposed by an American psychologist Daniel Cates include: number 1, economic conflict. It is brought about by a limited number of resources. The groups or individuals involved then comes into conflict to attain most of these resources, thus bringing forth hostile behaviors among those involved. Number 2, value conflict. It's concerned with the varied preferences and ideologies that people have as their principles. Conflicts driven by this factor are demonstrated in wars wherein separate parties have sets of beliefs that they assert in an aggressive manner at that. Next, power conflict. Power conflict occurs when the parties involved intend to maximize what influence it has in the social setting. Such a situation can happen among individuals, groups, or even nations. In other types of conflict, power is also evident as it involves an asserting of influence to another. 5 beliefs that propel group towards conflict. Roy Adelson and Judy Adelson investigated some of the important roles that beliefs may play in triggering or constraining conflict between groups. On the basis of a review of relevant literature, 5 belief domains stand out as especially noteworthy. Superiority. Individual superiority centers on a conviction that one is more special and deserving than others. Such a belief frequently results in the dismissal of societal rules. At the group level, conviction of superiority leads the member to perceive the outgroup as contemptible. Next, injustice. An individual's conviction of injustice revolves perception of mistreatment, which can result in falsely identifying events as unfair that are merely unfortunate. Such a mindset could therefore result in inappropriate retaliatory acts. Leaders are often crucial in prompting the perception of a group's situation as not simply unjust but intolerable, requiring violent change. Next, vulnerability. A vulnerability core belief often involves overestimating the dangers in the world and the inability of the individual to protect him or her. Such catastrophic thinking leads individuals to make unsubstantiated inferences about the future. Distrust. Individuals' distrust involves a pervasive tendency to interpret others' behaviors suspiciously, interfering with the one's ability to distinguish between trustworthy and hostile sources. Helplessness. Helplessness is the belief that even an individual's carefully planned and executed actions will fail, resulting in diminished personal motivation. A collective mindset of powerlessness reflects a group's assessment that they are at a competitive disadvantage due to their inadequacies and lack of opportunity for advancement. Now, let's discuss about conflict escalation. Conflict escalation is the process by which conflicts grow in severity over time. This may refer to conflicts between individuals or groups in interpersonal relations, or it may refer to the escalation of the hostilities in a political or military context. A number of factors, including increased commitment to one's position, use of harder influence tactics, and formation of coalition, propel the escalation of the conflict. Uncertainty and commitment. As conflicts escalate, group members' doubts and uncertainties are replaced with a firm commitment to their position. People rationalize their choices once they have made them. They seek out information that supports their views, reject information that disconfirms their views, and become more entrenched in their original position. Additionally, people believe that once they commit to a position publicly, they should stick with it. Perception and misperception. Individuals' reactions to the conflict are shaped by their perception of the situation and people in the situation. During the conflict, opponents' inferences about each other's strengths, attitudes, values, and personal qualities tend to be larger distorted. Misperceiving motivations. misperceiving motivations during the conflict, opponents often become mistrustful of one another, wondering if their cooperative motives were replaced by competitive ones. This loss of trust makes it difficult to return to the cooperative relationships. Soft tactics and hard tactics. People use soft tactics at the outset of the conflict, but as it escalates, tactics become stronger and harder. Although hard tactics can overwhelm the opponent, they often intensify conflict. If one party threatens the other, the threatened party will fare best if it cannot respond with the counter threat. Equally powerful opponents, however, learn to avoid the use of power if the fear of retaliation is high. Reciprocity and upward conflict spiral. In many cases, upward conflict spiral are sustained by the norms of reciprocity. If one group or person criticizes the other, the criticized person or group feels justified in doing the same. In conflict situation, opponents often follow the norm of rough reciprocity, that is, they give too much or too little in return. At lower levels of conflict, opponents overmatch their threats, while at the high levels of conflict, they undermatch their threats. Overmatching may serve as a strong warning, while undermatching may be used to send conciliatory messages. Irritation and anger. It is generally difficult for most people to remain calm and collected in a conflict situation. However, an increase in negative emotion, that is anger, only exacerbates the initial conflict. Even when group members begin to discuss their position calmly and dispassionately, once they become committed to their positions, an emotional expression often replaces logical discussion. Anger is also contagious. When group members negotiate with someone who is angry, they become angry themselves. As said by John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. Now, let's learn about conflict management styles. Conflict management is the practice of being able to identify and handle conflicts sensibly, fairly, and efficiently. Since conflicts in a business are a natural part of workplace, it is important that there are people who understand conflicts and know how to resolve them. With the arising of these intractable conflicts comes the need for conflict management. In dealing with conflict, there are conflict management styles to be followed. The Thomas Gilman Conflict Mode Instrument, which is an assessment used globally in conflict handling, specifies 5 strategies used to address conflict. They are as follows: accommodating. Accommodation involves having to deal with the problem with an element of self-sacrifice. An individual sets aside his own concerns to maintain peace in the situation. Thus, the person yields to what the other wants, displaying the form of selflessness. Next, avoiding. In this approach, there is withdrawal from the conflict. The problem is being dealt with the thorough and passive attitude. Avoiding is mostly used when the perceived negative ends outweigh the positive outcomes. Next, collaborating. Collaborating aims to find a solution to the conflict through cooperating with other parties involved. Hence, communication is an important part of this strategy. Next, competing. Competition involves authoritative and assertive behaviors. In this style, the aggressive individual aims to instill pressure on the other parties to achieve a goal. Compromising. Compromising is about coming up with a resolution that would be acceptable to the parties involved. Thus, one party is willing to sacrifice their own sets of goals as long as the other will do the same. Hence, it can be viewed as a mutual give and take scenario where the parties submit the same amount of investment for the problems to be solved. At last, we will try to analyze the steps of conflict resolution. Learning how to handle conflict efficiently is a necessary skill for anyone in management and the key to preventing it from hindering employees' professional growth. There are 5 basic steps to conflict resolution. The more information you have about the cause of the conflict, the more easily you can help to resolve it. To get the information you need, use a series of questions to identify the cause. As a manager or supervisor, you need to give both parties the chance to share their side of story. It will give you a better understanding of the situation as well as demonstrate your impartiality. Often, it is not the situation but the perspective on the situation that causes anger and ultimately lead to a shouting match or other visible and disruptive evidences of the conflict. The sources of conflict might be a minor problem that occurs months before, but the level of stress might grow to the point where the two parties start attacking each other personally instead of addressing the real problem. After getting each party's viewpoint on the conflict, the next step is to get each to identify how the situation could be changed. Again, question the parties to solicit their ideas. How can you make things better between you? As a mediator, you have to be an interactive listener, aware of every verbal nuance as well as a good reader of body language. You are listening for the most acceptable course of action, point out the merits of your various ideas and not only from each other's perspective but in terms of benefits to the organization. The mediator needs to get the two parties to shake hands and agree to one of the alternatives identified. As said by Winston Churchill, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. With this, we come to the end of today's program. Hope you have understood it well. Thank you and goodbye.